Hi everybody, StephenFlagg here, and I know I'm really not a gaming guy, but lately I have been playing a lot of The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. I've been playing with a lot of mods lately. I completed the game without mods, and now I've been using a lot of mods. And it seems the more mods that you put on, the more slowdown you're going to have until eventually you're going to break your game. So I've been utilizing a mod known as the CTD and Memory Patch ENBoost by Boris. Uh, Now what this is actually an ENB mod, which is like an environmental mod. And what this does is it can increase your frame rate and decrease the amount of memory usage on your system. Now Skyrim itself has a cap. It can only go so far. I think it's 3.1 gigabytes before it just stops working. There is a 4 gigabyte patch out there that allows your system to use 4 gigabytes. But with this, it actually does increase your frame rate as long as you've got it set up correctly. Now the problem is nobody really has any idea how to set it up correctly, and all you can really do is run around on the Nexus site and read other people's comments and test it for yourself. So I thought basically I would explain what is in the INI file and exactly what it does. Now, I'm not an expert. I'm far from being an expert at this stuff. I'm going to explain it in layman's terms, and if I don't know how something works, I'm going to say I don't know, and you can let me know down in the comments below. Now, just to get started, you can actually check out one of Gopher's vids. It's the Crash to Desktop ENBoost video that he does. He shows you how to set it up and how to download it and get it set up into your system. But basically you have to download the latest ENB file. I'll put the link in the description. You're going to unpack that and put it into the same folder as your Skyrim exe. Then you're going to go to the Nexus site, download the CTD boost file. It's at 5.0 right now. You're going to unrar that as well. Now when you open that up, you're going to see several file folders for different VRAM. Your VRAM is your video card memory, how much memory your video card has internally. So what you're going to want to do is choose the one that is equal to your video card memory. Open that up and you're going to find an ENB local INI. You're going to copy that over into your Skyrim folder, the same one where your exe is and where you just put the ENB file. And that is the file. Yes, copy it as well and overwrite. That is the file that we're going to be editing and we're going to take a look at. So let's see what we've got. Okay, once again, I am not an expert at this. I'm going to be explaining this very simply, and a lot of this stuff I don't understand. I will give you links to where I'm getting my information so you can check it out for yourself and read it for yourself, gain what you can from it. So we're going to start with the proxy section of the INI file. Now, what that does is it allows for another D3, D9 DLL file to be used. Now, what that does, it just enables the ENB to be compatible with other processors, like an FXAA processor, an SMAA processor, and like SweetFX. Now, most of the time, you're not going to change these settings. I'm not a very smart person when it comes to those. I basically leave those exactly the way that they are in the ENB. Okay, so now we move on to the global settings. These global settings rarely need to be changed unless you're using an external file. Like basically if you're using another ENB, if something to change the lighting or the atmosphere of your game. So you have the setting use patch speed hack without graphics. If you have that set to true, you're just going to be using the ENBoost. So you're going to be getting your frame rate increase or your memory storage modifications. You won't be using the graphical modifications of your other ENB. If you want to continue using that, you have to set use patch speed hack without graphics to false. Now, if you want to turn off your ENB, you can always hit Shift F12 while you're playing the game. But basically, if I'm trying to gain frame rate or if I've got stutters, I will set that to true. Now we have use deferred rendering. Now this line, it uses the memory reduction features without using graphic modifications of the ENB. So again, it's going to be using your ENBoost rather than your EN game itself. So use deferred rendering, you should set that to true. I usually set it to true. Then we've got force fake video card. Now what that does is it forces software rendering. Now that was originally used as a fix for AMD users. Basically you're going to set that to false and leave it at false. There's really no need for it even to be in there anymore. Now the next area is performance. Now this setting was just originally implemented to increase performance in some areas. Boris hasn't really explained exactly what the parameters are for this. It's some sort of a DirectX optimization. You should always leave speed hack at true. Okay, and then we come along to the multi-head section. Multi-heads, really, they just shouldn't be changed. All your default settings work for all the systems. So the force video adapter index and the video adapter index, just leave them the way they were right when you downloaded them. Then we move on to the memory section. This is where a lot of people have questions. ENB itself has a memory reducing feature. It can reduce crashes to desktop that are caused when Skyrim reaches its memory limit. It's not going to stop crashes to desktop from mod conflicts or anything that you've done to the game itself. If you've made changes to the game, then the crashes are more or less your fault, not the fault of this mod. So let's take a look at all of the settings here. We've got expand system memory x64. Now what that is a fix for game engine buffer limitations. It allows a 64-bit system to access 3 to 4 gigabytes of RAM and it gives it optimized performance. Now if you have a 32-bit system, you can leave it to true, but really you should have it set to false. Then we have the reduced system memory usage. This setting is to enable the ENBoost features of the ENB to dramatically reduce crashes to desktop. Now it's highly recommended you should use that, so that should be set to true. Then we have disable driver memory manager. What that does is it reduces the chance of crashes to desktop or low performance due to having a bad video driver. But if you have a good driver, leaving it at false can also be really well. It can really work. When it's set to true, a bad driver can actually lower performance and it'll pause where you would normally crash, like your game will freeze. Now if you're getting crashed desktops even well it's set to true, then try setting it to false. This is one of those ones you have to play around with. Then we have disable preload to VRAM. Now when that is set to true, it can give you faster load times because what it does is it doesn't load anything into the video memory until you're actually looking at it. Usually the game will load everything around you. Instead, what this does is it stops it from loading everything around you and just loading what you're looking at. Now, the downside to this is it can cause more stutter because data has to be loaded into the memory quickly as you're moving around and going, as you're jumping around or you're attacking. So it's recommended, instead of changing this to true, you should use the free VRAM button, which needs to be set up. We'll talk about that in a minute. Before you go into new areas or before you fast travel, because that will actually clear the video memory. And that can also help you out with stutter, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So disable disable preload to VRAM, you should set that to false. Now we have enable unsafe memory hacks. Now what that does, it's for people that have a lot of stutter and basically it doesn't use your memory allocation, it doesn't use compression, and it doesn't use the ENB host. It will only work when you have reduced system memory usage to true. Alt-Tab won't work when it's set to true. It's basically something you're not going to use unless you have a pretty crappy system. Like if you've got a 32-bit system, you may want to use enable unsafe memory hacks. Then we have reserved memory size megabytes. Now what that is a buffer for your memory and video RAM swap. Now generally, the smaller the number you have there equals less RAM and less crashes to desktop. Larger will give you less stutter in heavy areas when you have a lot of mods or you've changed your UGrids value. So basically, if you've got a video card with 2 gigabytes or more of video RAM, 512 is a good baseline. For less, you can set that to 256. Honestly, I run mine at about 128. I find with 512 I get a lot of crashes. 256 I get a lot of freezing, but 128 I seem to work pretty well. Okay, and then we have video memory size megabytes. Now this setting is just basically what your VRAM is. So if you've got 1 gig, it's 1024. If you've got 2 gigs, it's 2048. Now these are variables. I mean, a lot of people have their games running great with higher or lower settings than what you should never set it higher than what your VRAM is. But I've done it myself, and I've actually had some great gaming experiences with no crashes. But generally set that to what your video RAM is. Okay, now we've got the Windows section. Now this section is just used to enable borderless windows. Now what that does is instead of running Skyrim full screen, it runs it in a window, so it makes it much easier for you to shut it down. It sucks in less memory if it's being run in a window. Sometimes I find the quality suffers if you're running in a window. But I honestly, I run my Skyrim full screen all the time. But when you have this mod, when you have Force Borderless active, you can use Alt-Tab to get out, which is kind of nice. But that only works as well if Enable Unsafe Memory Hacks from the memory section is set to false. So we go on to the game engine. The settings in the engine, it's basically edits. Now, one of the best things for you to remember when you're playing Skyrim is go to your video card settings, turn off anisotropic filtering, because the ENB itself uses anisotropic filtering, and the two will clash with one another, and that could cause issues with your game. You should also turn off your anti-aliasing. Honestly, my biggest problem was I had left my anisotropic filtering on for a long time, and I could not figure out why this mod was not working. When I finally turned it off, I jumped up to another 20 frames per second. It was fantastic. So basically what you've got is force anisotropic filtering. Now what that does is it forces the filtering of all textures that need to be filtered, not the ones that don't need to be filtered, which is a huge memory save for you. So you should basically have that set to true. The next one is max anisotropy. That's the level of your anisotropy filtering. Your levels are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Like the higher the value is, the better quality. Then you've got enable VSync, false or true. Now this will enable VSync, which is recommended. You should always have that active because the game itself has issues. When you go over 60 frames per second, you'll see things flying into the air and flipping upside down. My game does jump over 60 frames per second, and I have had some crazy things happen. So you should usually use your VSync. If you don't like VSync, you can use the FPS limiter. We'll talk about that in just a second. Now we have the audio display super sampling resolutions. This setting is just recommended to be left false. It's only for advanced users. I honestly have no idea what it's used for, so I can't explain it. So we go on to the FPS limiter. Now, what the FPS limiter does, we have wait busy renderer. If that is enabled to true, then each frame will wait until your graphic processor is finished drawing before it goes on to the next frame. Now, that's not going to help performance. That's actually going to slow you down, but it may fix some of the issues like lagging and crashes or any physics issues that you have. So this is one of those ones you want to test it just to see whether or not you want to use it. Your enable FPS limit. Now, if you're not using VSync, you're going to want to use this. If you set it to true, it will enable your limiter feature, which is your next entry, the FPS limit. You set that to how many frames per second you want to limit the game to, and it will lock it at that. Okay, now we get into the input section. Now this is basically your key bindings. I'm not going to go through these. Basically, you can look these up online and figure out exactly what these are. The ones you're probably going to want to know is the asterisk key on your number pad. That will show your frames per second up in the upper left-hand corner. Now, your key to free VRAM down below, that is the one that you want to set up. Now, I have mine set to F4, so I have it set to 115. So when you want to clear your VRAM, you just hit F4, the game freezes for half a second, your video memory is completely clear. Then you can walk through a door or do a quick fast travel and hope your game doesn't freeze up or lock up. Then we go on to the adaptive quality. Now what this does is it allows resource-hungry graphical features to be turned on and off so that you can maintain a decent frame per second while you're playing the game. So you can set that to true or false, and your desired frames per second is just the minimum frames per second that would be allowed so that your features would start to turn off. So like, say you have that set your desired FPS to 20. So at 20 frames per second, it'll start to turn off your heavy graphic features so that your frames per second will stay constant. And finally, we have the fix area. Now the fix settings are basically for fixing in-game physics when you have VSync turned off and your frames per second goes over 60. So most of these things are just basically fixing people's wagons flying into the air, or you hitting somebody with an arrow and having them bounce around like a rubber ball. Okay, so that's basically my knowledge of what's going on inside your ENB local file. I hope it helps some people. I know it probably confused more people. There are a lot of different sites you can go around. Go through the Nexus comments and check out what people are saying, or check out some of these links that I've got down below, and they will help you get your settings working. But basically, you just have to try. You have to keep changing your settings and find what works for you. It seems like everybody's settings work differently. But I hope this helped, and I'm StephenFlagg. I will talk to you later.